In today's video, I'm going to tell you how a pack of cigarettes saved Tag Heuer. Greetings and complications, my dear friends. Welcome to another video on our channel. You're watching GMT-3, the channel that makes complications simple. You're very welcome. Enjoy this video. Leave a comment, subscribe, and if you're not a subscriber yet, welcome. Want to take it a step further? Click on Become a Member and join our VIP club where we have exclusive discounts, prize giveaways. We raffled off a watch this month, exclusive partnerships here with our channel partners. I'm seeing discounts on maintenance here. Come be part of this club. We have a super lively WhatsApp group. Come join this crowd. I'm sure you're going to really enjoy it. In today's video, I'm going to tell you a story about a really unusual partnership. How a cigarette company ended up saving Tag Heuer in the American market and as a result helped Tag Heuer establish itself back in the 80s. Until the mid-80s, this partnership didn't exist, right? No, the partnership didn't exist. Technics from Vanguard hadn't bought Heuer yet to turn it into Tag Heuer. But back in the 70s, we had the famous Heuers. And there's a really cool story behind a chronograph, and it's known as the Viceroy, the 1163. In the early 70s, over in the United States, chronograph sales were really bad. Jack Heuer himself said that in 1971 in the United States, it was a year to completely forget. They hadn't even managed to sell 500 watches with this complication. Why? In the early 1970s, it was very difficult for a salesperson to convince a customer to spend almost 3 times more to buy a chronograph. In today's collecting world, it's very easy to have several watches in your collection, but this habit was very rare in the 1970s. People would buy a single watch to keep it for their entire lives. And it didn't make sense for most customers to invest up to 3 times more in a watch that gave you a complication you simply wouldn't use. Even though we were living back then, in 1970-71 at the peak of the mechanical chronograph, right? It had just been created after that war. In the late 60s, we had Heuer itself with caliber 11 in its movements, but it didn't catch on. In 1971, less than 500 chronographs were sold, just so you have an idea, from Heuer in the American market. They sold much more, 10 times more, those track chronographs, right, for time measurement than actual wrist chronographs, exactly because their audience didn't really need it. So Heuer went through a very difficult year in 1971. That's when they were approached by Brown & Williamson Tobacco, a company that produced cigarettes. This brand, this Brown & Williamson, they were also starting to have a lot of trouble selling their product because in 1964, the US Department of Health started warning people that cigarettes cause cancer. So sales started to drop sharply from then on. Notably among women, the female audience was the first to notice this risk after the warnings and started to smoke less. The curve was going down in cigarette sales. Back in the early 70s, that was the heyday of those Macho Man cigarettes, right? Like Marlboro, right? That sold a lot. Everyone remembers, guys my age will remember the Marlboro ads from the 70s and 80s. And this Brown & Williamson had the second best-selling cigarette and the third, which was Viceroy. This Viceroy, it was targeted, it was a cigarette aimed at the female audience. But since it started selling less, Brown & Williamson started trying to market this cigarette to men. And what was the marketing idea? To bring the whole world of racing into the Viceroy brand. And Marlboro already existed there with that whole style, right? Tied to a more country, rural, down-to-earth style. And Brown & Williamson wanted to bring the world of the racetracks to their Viceroy. They started sponsoring Parnelli, an IndyCar team in the United States, which had Mario Andretti and Al Unser as their drivers. And the car was completely painted in Viceroy's colors. And when Brown & Williamson entered this world, they wanted to be associated with it. Heuer, which at that time was already handling timekeeping. In 1971, it was the first time Heuer did the official timing for Formula One. So it was already starting to have that aura of a race timing company. And this cigarette company started talking to Heuer to do a very unusual promotion. They wanted to focus on selling this cigarette and also on that world of racetracks. So the management at Brown & Williamson approached Heuer's management and said, look, we want to do a 7-month partnership with you, and we expect to sell around 16,000 watches in this partnership. When Heuer heard that, he said, my God, it's too good to be true. And they asked, can you deliver 16,000 watches for us in just 7 months? Then Heuer said, of course we can. What's your idea? Then they said, we're going to put some ads in the main magazines in the country, and in these ads, your chronograph, the 1163, will be sold for $88 instead of $200. For that, the person just needs to send a card and an empty pack of cigarettes, obviously, to be able to buy this watch for $88. Heuer opened his eyes wide and said, my God, that's exactly what I needed to hear to boost my chronograph sales here in the United States. But the people at Heuer went to Jack Heuer and said, man, from $200 to $88, how are you going to make a profit on this? Then he said, leave it to me, I know what I'm doing. What was the big insight Heuer had? Starting in 1972, cigarette ads would be banned on television, only allowed in magazines. And Heuer knew then that Brown & Williamson, that Viceroy would move to advertising in magazines, and that's exactly what happened. The budget for Viceroy's advertising in 1972 during this partnership period was almost $14 million. Jack Heuer used 0.5% of that per year in his advertisements, and exactly what he thought would happen happened. The advertising was a success not for the cigarette brand but for Heuer. He started selling every 2 weeks what he expected to sell in an entire year in terms of chronographs, but then some problems started to arise. The people from Heuer came to him and said, hey, you're going to take a $200 watch from the store and sell it for $88. The store people aren't going to like that at all. Then he said, no, let's change the watch a bit. So he said he was going to make a watch with lower quality, but actually the only thing he did was change the bezel and the internal subdials. You know, the arrangement, the layout of the internal subdials. Other than that, the watch was exactly the same. Another concern was also that the watch would end up sitting unsold, and that also happened. But Heuer, he went to visit the stores, and when he arrived at the stores, he saw that the salespeople were extremely happy with the brand. He didn't understand. He said, wow, I'm selling a watch that used to cost $200 for $88 and you guys are happy with me? Then the guy said, no, actually the Heuer, the 1163 is full of dust. Nobody wants to buy it because of the promotion. But everyone is talking about the Heuer, and it's really easy to sell the other chronographs, the other watches. That ended up putting Heuer in the advertising spotlight and making it one of the most talked about brands of the year. And sales just exploded, not only of the chronographs, but also of the other Heuer watches throughout 1972. This little story, this extremely unusual partnership, right, something we would never see nowadays, ended up serving as a springboard to help Heuer make it through the 1970s in the American market. And there, in the early 1980s, Tag Heuer ended up establishing itself as we know it today. In other words, a very unusual partnership between a cigarette brand and Heuer helped make it stronger throughout the 1970s. It wasn't 16,000 watches sold in this partnership. Over the 7 months, it was around 5,000 watches. This partnership alone ended up consolidating Heuer in the American market, not just with this chronograph, but also as a brand as a whole. Pretty curious, right? This partnership is something unimaginable nowadays. That's it, my dear friends. That was today's curiosity. How did Viceroy, the third best-selling cigarette brand in the United States, become Viceroy? This ad was a total flop because only 5,000 watches, just 5,000 units were sold. But really, the fate of cigarettes was already more than sealed back in the 70s because people started to learn about the harmful effects that cigarettes cause. In fact, if you're a smoker today, my friend, you have all my support. Because I, many years ago, was a smoker, I used to smoke, and something that helped me a lot was those nicotine patches. Wow, that really helped me a lot. It was one of the steps. So my brother, if you have this bad habit, I totally encourage you to quit. After all, since the 60s, we've already known how harmful tobacco is. But anyway, this extremely unusual partnership ended up with Heuer. Jack Heuer was overjoyed in 1972 with this partnership, which made Heuer a household name. All the magazines, Newsweek, Time magazine, Playboy, Car magazines, all the American magazines advertised Heuer, and the company did really well with that publicity. That's it, my dear friends. That was an interesting fact from our video today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. A big hug. May God bless you. Quit smoking if you haven't already. And I'll see you soon in our next video, God willing. Bye-bye. Oh, and just out of curiosity, I did some research to find out what the minimum wage was in 1971 to see if these watches were expensive or not. The minimum wage in 1971 was $1.60 per hour. In other words, the full price of this $200 chronograph, you could buy it on minimum wage by working for 125 hours. So in just over 2 weeks of work, you could already buy a mechanical chronograph. So you can see the purchasing power that money had back then. Something unimaginable nowadays, being able to buy a mechanical chronograph with just 2 weeks of work, earning minimum wage.